John, last question for today.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with Alan Dawson?
Okay. He was my principal teacher. I studied with Alan over a 10-year
10 years.
period. Yeah, I mean not 10 years, consistently. But what would happen is I would study for some months, and I would go on the road, or there was a period where I lived in Florida for a couple of years. But basically from around 1972 and up to and through when I started at Berklee, which I said a minute ago was 1982. So I really studied with him beyond when I came here to teach. I actually went back to study with him, say between 82 through 84, 85 or something like that. So it was really over more than a 10-year period, 72 to somewhere around 85, 86 maybe. Okay, I'll give you another good story of one of those moments of revelation that came from Alan this time. And when I started to study with him, I'm your listeners or your watchers might not know, but I started as a rock drummer. I was a self-taught rock drummer because I grew up in the 60s, right? And so where I grew up was a very rural part of Massachusetts. It was actually on the Vermont border. And I lived next door to a dairy farm. So if I looked out my window, I saw cows. There weren't jazz clubs out there was just cows.
Those are really rocks.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm mentioning that because there was no jazz music in my community. And then again, being the 60s and being, like 12 years old in 1962 when I started, I naturally gravitated towards the music of the time, which was rock. And so I basically started by playing in a rock band. I was actually invited to be in the band before I even owned drums.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I had to say, hey, Dad, if you buy me drums, I can be in a band.
That's awesome.
Which is another story. But by the time I went to study with Alan, who, by the way, it was suggested to me to study with him by Max Roach.
Wow.
Because Max was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, which is near to where I grew up. And at that point, I had been playing with some guys who were students at UMass, although I wasn't a student. Mm-hmm. But I would go to Max Roach's ensemble class and his percussion ensemble class, and he actually let me stay in there, even though I wasn't a registered student. Yeah, he would invite me to play. I would play in a small group. In fact, another funny story, one time I was playing in Max Roach's ensemble, and he came up behind me and he said, no, don't play it like that. He said, play it more like Art Blakey would play it. And I had to turn around and go, I've never heard Art Blakey. And he was like, what? He said, you better get busy, man. And it was, here we are like 5 years later or whatever, playing Art, but that was before, and it was true, I had never heard Art Blakey. But anyways, what led to me studying with Alan was that when Max was at the University of Mass, he was a full-time teacher there. He lived in Amherst, and this is probably now, I guess it had to be the early 70s. But, at any rate, I asked Max, I said, do you give private lessons? I don't take private lessons with you. He said, no, I don't teach private lessons. And he didn't actually for the school as well. He had no private students.
Right.
Yeah, I kind of have my theories about why that is, but I don't know. Probably didn't want a lot of Max Roach, little Max Roaches running around. But at any rate, he said, no, I don't give private lessons, but you should go to Boston and find this guy, Alan Dawson. He's a good teacher. He'd be a good teacher for you. And so I came to this building that we're in now. So this is early 70s, right? And Alan Dawson was teaching here, up on the second floor. It's the woodwind department now, right? Yeah. But then it was a percussion department. So I found my way to this building. I went up on the second floor. I found the door. It said Alan Dawson. I knocked on the door. This guy came to the door. He wore like very distinguished, he used to wear these corduroy jumpsuits, not jumpsuits, but like jacket suits.
Yeah.
And so this guy answered the door, a very distinguished guy, very well-mannered. So, are you Mr. Dawson? Yeah. I said, well, do you give private lessons outside of Berklee? He said, well, you've come at the right time. He said, because I'm going to be leaving Berklee in another few months. And he said, I'll have a private teaching practice at my home in Lexington.
Wow.
And so it's the house I live in now, by the way.
Sergio told me that you...
So I said, great, give me your number, I'll call you. And so that's what actually led to me studying with Alan was kind of Max Roach not teaching lessons. So,
wow.
But the story I was actually getting around to telling you was that after about 3 lessons with Alan, remember now I'm self-taught rock drummer, I've been playing for about 10 years, but maybe 1 lesson from the guy that played in the bar across from the house, right? And so after about 3 or 4 lessons with Alan, I said, so could you give me an evaluation of my playing? And of course I wanted to say, oh yeah, man, you're the next
great.
Tony Williams, you're going to be just like Harvey Mason. So in his, very polite and honest way, he said, well, you're a proficient drummer. You've been playing for about 10 years. He said, but you're really a beginner. What? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you don't know any rudiments. Yeah. He said, you don't know how to read. Yeah. He said, you really only know one style of music, right? And I said, yeah. He said, so for all intents and purposes, you're really a beginner. And that was exactly what I needed to hear, in that moment. It was the truth, and it was only then that it set me on the path to say, okay, I gotta really I gotta get busy. I really gotta do some work and learn, so that
you did, apparently.
Yeah, it took me a while, but that's the most, again, it's like one of those lessons, like the one I mentioned about art, but it was really important for me to hear, I think, as a young drummer, that kind of honesty, So that began my 10+ year association with Alan. Now, the thing about Alan is, I don't know how many people realize this, but he was a tremendous player first. Max Roach even said, when we knew that we'd have to go to Boston and deal with Alan Dawson, we would be worried.
Wow.
That's from Max Roach, right? Because, if you go on probably YouTube, you can find some of the stuff with him, Sonny Rollins. But, just amazing technique and facility, but musicality.
Yeah.
But the thing about Alan as a teacher was he could come up with the most creative and ingenious exercises and methods for teaching particular concepts. Like you mentioned the rudimental ritual.
Yeah.
And if you think about that as a composition, really, it's genius. The way he put together almost 90 rudiments in 4 and 8 bar phrases, right, over a bossa nova foot pattern. It's pretty amazing that someone would conceive of that. And of course, everybody knows that he was known for developing 40 different ways of interpreting the syncopation book using 4-way coordination. So he was a very thoughtful guy, and that's why he was such a great teacher, I think. How do I reinforce this method, or how do I, what exercises can I do to teach this concept? And they were real winners. So, which leads me to what I wanted to play for you today. And this is one of the things in the Alan Dawson book that isn't on the audio disc, and it's something I constantly wish I had done a version of, because it's a little bit involved, and if you're just reading the text, you may or you may not get the exercise. So this will be for any of your listeners who want to look at the part of the Alan Dawson book that's the chapter called Soloing Over Song Form, or Soloing Over an AABA Tune.